There's a lot of good artwork in here. I just realized that's my brother did that, and then we have my daughter did this when she was in 5th grade. She's now an artist. So honored to be part of this series.
Well, I would like to first start with your early childhood music atmosphere. How was that music scene in your family?
Well, my family was very involved in music, and I didn't even understand that when I was a child because 5 of my uncles and my grandfather were professional musicians. So I just thought that was true of every family. My Uncle Harold was the most creative one. He was a soloist with the Philadelphia Orchestra on piano when he was very young, and became a Broadway composer, and he wrote musicals, and he also was a very good jazz pianist. So he was a classical pianist who just did all kinds of music. My Uncle Marvin played the trumpet, and he lived a long time, and I ended up eventually bringing him into my own projects in music.
There must be a lot of the eye-opening experiences for you as a child.
Yes, a lot. I'm from Philadelphia, which is a very musical place. The Philadelphia Orchestra is, I think, quite a bit older than the Boston Symphony, for example. And the music education in the schools was very good, I would say, and there was a lot of it. So by the time you were in 3rd grade, everyone was given an instrument and free instrumental lessons. You know, everyone had this opportunity, and you became part of something that was very big musically in a way. By the time I was in junior high, I realized that there were a lot of different kinds of music that I didn't even know, and especially because my junior high had wonderful African-American musicians, because Philadelphia is a very integrated city. They invited me to play my saxophone in a band with 3 people who they all played all the instruments. So they played piano, bass, and drums, and they would switch. It was very inspiring. It kind of showed me that it's not about playing one instrument, it's about playing music.
Yeah.
And that music, we didn't use any written music. They just taught by ear. I also was taking piano lessons, and I found the piano lessons much less interesting.
Right.
Because the music was all written out, and you had to play it the way your teacher told you to play it. It didn't make any sense to me, but I did it. But I also played with these musicians, and then also I was very interested in the synagogue music, the Jewish synagogue music, because the cantor sang in a way that sounded it was very beautiful, and it led me to a different feeling of music. I was in the synagogue choir, and so there we sang in Hebrew. We accompanied the cantor, and I found that fascinating. It seemed like a very old tradition, and so I had a lot of different experiences. I formed my own band when I was in 5th or 6th grade. We would rehearse in my garage. Wow. And I would just ask friends who played music to come over. And then I found out some of them only read music, and some of them could improvise, and some of them, they all enjoyed it. But you sort of start understanding that there are different levels of knowing music if you do that when you're 10 years old.
So you transitioned from classical piano to jazz saxophone. That was a quite shift, but it's actually a breakthrough for you.
My grandfather had a lot of instruments. And you would open a closet and find a new instrument. I was in 2nd or 3rd grade, and my brother had opened up a closet once and found a saxophone.
Oh, wow.
So he played the saxophone, and then he chipped his teeth, so I ended up with a saxophone. And there was a small clarinet, and there was a big clarinet. It was like there was E-flat clarinet, B-flat. You try them out, you learn to play them a little bit. There was a trombone. There was a baritone horn. The very first instruments I played was a baritone horn. From 1876, it said. And it was very easy to get a sound. You go, and you make a sound. So my grandfather showed me how to do that. I think they thought it was very funny to have a little kid play this big tuba, So improvising is something that you do connecting what you hear in your head to how you play.
Yeah.
That was more interesting to me than connecting, just looking at dots on a page and playing. So it didn't matter what instrument, but I was always figuring out songs. There was a very popular group called the Tijuana Brass when I was a child. And I liked the sound, and it was something kids could relate to. And so whenever they had a new record, I would figure out all the songs.
Right now we're doing the apps.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's an interesting thing because it's not just apps. It's that like my students will ask me, they'll video my playing so that they can see what I'm doing. And we didn't have that. You had to hear it. The only way that I could really learn to get better was gradually to listen to things with harder chords and more sounds. I remember there was a pianist I loved very much to listen to named Thomas Waller. And he was one of the greatest musicians of the 20th century, an African-American pianist and organist. And I had a piece that I loved by him, Thomas Waller. And I remember I was probably in 6th grade, 5th or 6th grade, I started figuring out this piece. That piece was on the piano. I would write it out, and I was still doing that when I was in college. That's it, one piece. And it took me probably 7 or 8 years to figure out everything he did. But that was the kind of project I would give myself.
Wow. For Sick Home Sessions, so this is a mini concert series that organized during the pandemic.
Yes.
Well, it was a very dance-like energy song. You mentioned about mimicking the dulcimer hammer sound. And that's interesting. How does that kind of phrasing translate into the piano?
Oh, that's really interesting. So the piano has a lot of sounds. I remember when my teachers taught me classical piano, they said, you hold your fingers like this, and everything it must all be, you keep your wrist still, and you play like this, and okay, that's good for like a couple pieces. And what about everything else? So if you're going to sound like a hammered dulcimer, that's not going to do it. That's going to sound like Bill Canto singing is what they're imitating there. So to get the sounds out of the piano, like to make it sound like a hammered dulcimer, I could show you a little bit. Yeah. So the klezmer thing on piano, to me, it's a matter of making the piano sound like a hammered dulcimer, because piano is not traditional in klezmer so much. So instead you would be playing on the strings with a hammer. So for me, it's like I might play. Or something different like,
Schuler had high claim of Ram Lake, which in 1972 he became the first chair of the third string department.
Yes.
Called. So he was claimed that he is a great composer, conductor, but above all a great educator.
Yes.
How was your learning experiences from him?
I read about Gunther Schuller when I was younger, and he was a big hero of mine. I learned about him from another composer who's still around, who's in his 90s, named David Amram. And David Amram wrote a book when he was very young. He's written 3 autobiographies now. He wrote one when he was 37, one when he was around 60, and another one when he was in his 80s. 3 autobiographies. But the first one came out when I was in high school. And he wrote about Gunther Schuller. And he talked about Gunther Schuller opening up the whole world of music to him so that it was one world. So Gunther Schuller had come from Berlin from Germany before the Second World War, I think 1937. His family left Germany. They were in the Berlin, his parents were in the Berlin Philharmonic, and they got jobs in the New York Philharmonic. And Gunther, when he was a young person, came to New York, and he looked around and he saw there were a lot of kinds of music, which in Germany he didn't see so much when he was young. But in New York, he said, wow, this is amazing. There are great musicians who play black improvisational music. But Gunther Schuller was interesting because he was the president of the school. You know, by then there were 750 students, so he was successful in bringing the school, making the school interesting and attracting very interesting students. And it became a school that was really a destination for people who wanted to do creative things. And none of the other schools were that. I just have to say, I can't think of another music school that was anything like New England Conservatory in the 1970s. So I was thinking, how can I get this person to know who I am? Okay, right? He's the president of the school. So he had at the conservatory a ragtime ensemble, which was very interesting because ragtime was not something they taught at conservatories. But he had already won a Grammy with the ragtime ensemble. So I looked in my closet at my grandfather's music from the 1920s, and I thought, maybe this will work, you know? Maybe I'll give him an arrangement he's never seen. And I took a few arrangements out, and I brought them to his office. I said, okay, I know you have a ragtime ensemble, and these arrangements are for a similar kind of group. They're, you know, theater arrangements or vaudeville music from the... He was interested in this. And he looks at the arrangements, and I had something called Shuffle Along by U.B. Blake, which was a post-ragtime, but it was the first African-American musical. He looks at it, he says, oh, we have a concert on Friday. I really want to do this. I've been looking for this piece. And, you know, this is something my grandfather played in the 20s.
Incredible.
And I show it to him. I say, well, it's missing parts. It's missing parts. Oh, what parts is it missing? Well, there's no viola part. There's no bass part. There's no second card. He says, okay, well, I'll tell you what. So you fill all those parts in and then bring it back to me in 2 days. Okay. I'm like 18 years old. I'd never done anything like that. There was no score. So I filled in all the missing parts. I brought it back to him. They played it on that Friday at a big concert, and then he knew who I was. Wow. But it was very funny because it was like, I mean, he asked me to do something I didn't know how to do. Oh, wow. This was the pattern with Gunther Schuller, always. So the next thing that happened, I was playing a concert for what was called the Third Stream Department. And this idea was, you know, to train people in oral tradition. We were doing a concert for the Third Stream Department based on the music of Thelonious Monk. And this was, I think, 1975. At the end of the concert, Rand Blake, who was the chair of this department, always asks somebody to play a solo piece on their instrument to sum up the whole concert. Improvised. He asked me to do that concert. He said, okay, well, I want you to improvise something on your oboe at the end of the concert. So you listen to the concert, and then you come up with an original piece on your instrument, completely solo.
On the spot. On
the spot. You can't plan it because you don't know what the concert was. So I improvised this piece on the oboe based on the song Crisscross by Thelonious Monk, which again, it was a favorite of Gunther Schuller. He had written arrangements of this and taken it in a contemporary direction, and I knew his recording. After the concert, he comes to me and he said, okay, look, I have an idea. You come to my office tomorrow morning. Now, remember, I was not an oboe major. I was a composition major, and there were 27 oboe majors at that time. There were way too many, but he's asking me. I go to his office the next morning, and he has a pile of music on his desk, like oboe music he says, I'm starting a contemporary music ensemble, and these pieces are very hard, and they go in microtones, all kinds of notes that are not even in the scale. They have very fast passages, and they go all over the range of the instrument, and you are the perfect person to play this. And I pick up the music, and I start looking at it. It's like impossible. It's like the pages, you can't even see any white. It's like just 64th notes, 32nd. I mean, it's like insane.
Was you afraid?
As I said to him, I said, I think you have the wrong person. I can't do this. And he said, when I heard you play last night, you did all of this and more in your improvisations. Now you have to learn to read it.
So you learn it backwards. So you
exactly.
From here, then read
yes. I said, okay. And I took it, and I worked, and I was in the contemporary ensemble. I was the oboe player sitting next to, you know, again, the virtuoso musicians of the school, and he decided I was one of them, which I wasn't, but I became that. you know. And that's how he was. It was always that. It was always some challenge that would just like, you would never even think you could possibly do it. And because he would challenge you like that, you would be able to do it.
I think there is no comfort zone really for musicians. We have to always dare to change, always dare to
Exactly. That is exactly the point. And since then, my whole thing in music has been like, if the phone rings and Itzhak Perlman asks, like, do you do orchestra arrangements? Of course. Or the phone rings and somebody says, you know, can you do a film score for this movie? Of course you can. You know, if they hire you to do it, if you're a musician who has enough training, the whole thing is to be prepared. I was listening to a conductor, a famous conductor, right? Herbert Blumstadt was with the BSO, and somebody was doing an interview with him. The interviewer was asking him, so you went to Tanglewood and you wanted to, you know, somehow you got to meet Leonard Bernstein and you became his assistant and he taught you everything about conducting. And how did you get to the point where Bernstein would single you out as the person who could succeed him, you know, at Tanglewood as a great conductor? And he said this, he said, well, if you prepare enough, miracles happen. In other words, if you prepare yourself to do everything, then things happen that you can't imagine. I really love that idea, you know. In other words, the reason that doesn't happen for other people is they're not prepared for it. So the idea is to get an education and give yourself an education where you can do everything.
Yeah, we have to get our own baggage.
Yeah.
And use it for the battles.
Yes, that's good too.
There is an interesting quote, I think it's from Remblay, which he says we are easily get influenced with all the music heroes that we're listening to, but as musicians we need to find our own voice. So for your perspective, how should we navigate this balancing between individuality and influence?
The thing about it is, I see musical identity as having four parts. And I think everybody has technique. So yeah, you probably should practice, you know, and be able to play your instrument so that you can at least do the music you want to do. So that's important. Technique is very important. I think for all of us, we have our own life experience, right? So we're always, you know, growing as people, and we take that in, and we feel sad or happy or connected to this or that or angry. All that is part of it too. So we have our own life experience. We have our own level of creativity, you know. So I think some people are more creative than others, and your tendency is going to be to do original things. They might sound like someone else, or they might sound only like you. And that's where repertoire comes in. So these are the four components I see: technique, repertoire, creativity, you know, and your life experience. The repertoire means you know a lot of music. That's different than technique. Just 2 weeks ago I was playing a concert, but before it they wanted me to play in the lounge for requests. And it was fun. People would come over and say like, okay, can you play the Maple Leaf Rag? Oh, can you play some Stevie Wonder? I still do that. I love doing that because it's like they're trying to stump me, you know. But the repertoire is the first thing you have to have. You have to have the repertoire in order to take it in another direction. And some people just stop there. They have the technique, they can learn the repertoire, and they're happy to just play it. Some people transform it because they have a lot of creativity, or their life experience tells them, I must play it in some way that sounds nothing like the original version, because I want to express myself through this piece. And you find specific composers and performers that speak to you and focus on them. I was always very interested when I was young. I listened to a lot of different music. I found a guy named Randy Weston. Now he became a good friend, and I brought him to the conservatory 3 times and we gave him an honorary degree. Not very well known, Randy Weston. But to me, when I heard his music, I said, this is what I want to do. And it wasn't that I wanted to sound like him. It was that I liked the way that he combined African rhythms and American, I would say, you know, black improvisational harmonies. Some people would use the word jazz. I don't like the word, so I say black improvisational harmonies. The harmonies I liked very much, but I liked the way he played very much. Like when I just played for you, if I play anything, I'm thinking about Randy. Randy sounded very much like Duke Ellington. But I liked Randy better because African Americans have African roots. They need to know about the African roots. And only when they know about the African roots will they really be able to come into their own identity. And that's how he did it for himself. I looked at it for myself as the necessity of looking into my Eastern European Jewish roots and really learning about that music. And when I did that, I found ways of phrasing and playing that were different than anyone else that I'd heard. And that ended up being a strong part of my personal identity. I realized that when I play, I bring something of the feeling of the cantor, the Jewish cantor, or the Klezmer, who's the Jewish instrumentalist, which everyone in my family was at some point. And bringing that to the music gave me a personal way to play. So, I mean, that's kind of a roundabout way of saying you transform this in your own way. Now, a jazz singer might study Billie Holiday, but they're never going to sound like Billie Holiday because Billie Holiday's life experience was different than theirs. So they're going to find their own thing based on Billie Holiday. And that might be great. And that might be a whole new thing. Very famous singer right now is Cécile Laurent-Salvon, for example. So Cécile is someone who takes this process very seriously. I don't hear a lot of people who take that process so seriously, but that's an example of someone who finds, Sullivan Fortner, great accompanist for her and real collaborator. And you find the right people. And then you invent something new, and she has been able to do that when she collaborates, especially with Sullivan. So, I mean, that's how it works. I have certain people, I collaborate a lot with my co-chair, Eden McAdam-Somer, who I think is the most brilliant violinist of her generation. Although she's not that famous, but she can do everything. We just played a concert together last week in Houston, and I think we did things no one else could do, So, I mean, I think that's how it works.